다음으로 건공감리를 그려볼게요. 4개 모서리에 그린 사괴에는 각기 다른 의미가 있어요. 건괴는 하늘, 곤괴는 땅, 감괴는 물, 이괴는 불을 상징해요. 우리 선조들이 생활 속에서 즐겨 쓰던 태극 문양을 중심으로 만들어진 태극기는 우주와 더불어 끝없이 창조와 번영을 바라는 우리 민족의 이상을 담고 있답니다. 대한민국의 정체성과 자긍심을 드러내고 우리 민족을 하나로 뭉치게 하는 태극기, 우리의 자랑스러운 국가 상징입니다. 한국 바로 알리기, 여러분도 함께 해주세요.
There's a part of me that's letting you go. Some of you all are my favorite. You had to follow me back. Someone told you, songs playing in my head. I'm with you. C'est la vie, I've grown up my life. I'm sorry, I'm so done with you. I tried my best, but you said, oh boy, me too. I'm so done with being dumb and done with you. Do you think about us? 'Cause I'm so done with being dumb and done with you.
In our headlines on this Wednesday, April 22nd, here in South Korea. President Lee Jae-myung and his Vietnamese counterpart To Lam are sitting down for their summit in Hanoi on this Wednesday to touch upon trade, supply chains and more. Elsewhere, US President Donald Trump extends his 2-week ceasefire with Iran, reportedly at the request of Pakistan, while awaiting a, quote, unified peace proposal from Tehran. Meanwhile, here on the local front, findings by the Bank of Korea show the producer price index standing at 125.2 in March, up 1.6% on month, the highest monthly jump since April 2022. We start over in Hanoi today, where President Lee Jae-myung and his Vietnamese counterpart To Lam are scheduled to sit down for their summit. High on their agenda is partnership in advancing trade and in building resilient supply chains. Arirang's Yoon Jung-min files this report.
The South Korean president has touched down in Hanoi for his state visit, having wrapped up his trip to New Delhi. President Lee Jae-myung will meet To Lam, Vietnam's top leader and general secretary of the Communist Party. It will be their second engagement in about 8 months, following To Lam's state visit to Korea last August. The summit will include an exchange of documents, a joint press conference, and a state dinner. High on the agenda is cooperation in trade, nuclear energy, supply chains, and critical minerals. The two countries plan to increase bilateral trade to $150 billion a year by 2030.
Amid growing global uncertainties, we will strengthen communication to establish an economic and security partnership, including stable energy, supply chains, and critical mineral cooperation.
Science cooperation, cultural and people-to-people exchanges are also on the agenda. During his stay, the South Korean leader will meet Vietnamese Prime Minister Lam and National Assembly Chairman Chen Tae-man, ranked number 2 and number 3 respectively in the country's power structure. A business forum is also scheduled.
Diplomatic officials say the president's trip to this fast-growing nation carries significance as South Korea explores opportunities to expand its diplomatic horizon at a crucial time in geopolitics. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, Hanoi.
Earlier on this Wednesday, President Lee Jae-myung hosted a luncheon for the Korean community in Hanoi. And at the event, he vowed to actively address challenges faced by overseas Koreans. He also highlighted the needs of multicultural families, noting that there are now some 100,000 Korean Vietnamese households across both nations. Vietnam is home to the 5th largest Korean community in the world and the largest in ASEAN, with a population of roughly 200,000. Now, for more insight on this latest interaction between President Lee Jae-myung and his Vietnamese counterpart To Lam in Hanoi on this Wednesday, I turn to a counterpart at the national broadcaster Vietnam Television. Lê Khang Minh, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you for having us.
Let's start with a few words on the overall atmosphere there, as the two leaders are scheduled to sit down for their summit.
President Lee Jae-myung's visit is quite significant, not only because Vietnam and South Korea have built strong ties over decades, but also because President Lee Jae-myung is among the first foreign heads of state to visit Vietnam after the 16th National Assembly of Vietnam finalized organizational structure and key state personnel, where Party General Secretary To Lam was elected as state president of Vietnam. So there's definitely a sense that this is a highly anticipated visit with a lot of interest on both sides. Vietnamese ambassador to South Korea, Vu Ho, has said the visit could elevate bilateral cooperation with a vision towards the 2030-2045 period, while South Korean ambassador to Vietnam, Choi Young-sam, describes it as an opportunity to open a new golden era in bilateral relations.
In the meantime, then, what aspects of this summit are making media headlines there in Vietnam?
The state visit of President Lee Jae-myung has received strong media attention here. In the lead-up, Vietnamese outlets have been highlighting the depth of the relationship, describing it as long-term, increasingly substantive, and even a strategic anchor for the future. To illustrate, South Korea remains Vietnam's largest foreign investors, with cumulative registered capital exceeding $90 billion, and one of its leading trading partners, with two-way trade estimated at around $88 billion in 2025, up 8% year-on-year. So far, more than 350,000 Vietnamese are living in South Korea, including around 100,000 Vietnam-Korea multicultural families. In tourism, South Korea was Vietnam's second largest source of visitors last year, with 4.3 million arrivals, accounting for 21% of total international visitors.
The first foreign leader to be hosted by the Lee Jae-myung administration upon entering office last June was the Vietnamese leader. And it appears that this is also the case for the To Lam administration following its re-election earlier this year. What have Vietnamese pundits been saying with regard to the significance of Seoul-Hanoi ties, especially in light of the current geopolitical environment?
What you mentioned really underscores the significance of this visit. Vietnamese ambassador to South Korea, Vu Ho, noted that the visit comes at a time when bilateral ties are at their most advanced stage, with both countries well positioned to contribute to shaping an open, inclusive and rules-based regional architecture, thereby supporting not only their respective national interests, but also broader regional stability and prosperity. Meanwhile, South Korean ambassador to Vietnam Trae Yong-sam expects that the partnership between our two countries, seen as key cooperative partners not only within ASEAN but also globally, will become a strong pillar, playing a leading role in promoting peace and shared prosperity in the region and the world.
Hang Meng, with regard to the public, what appears to be the overall impression of South Korea among people there?
Vietnamese people generally have a strong admiration and affection for South Korea's contributions to development in both countries across many fields. In sports, for example, the public widely recognizes the impact of Korean experts, especially coaches like Park Hang-seo and Kim Sang-sik, who have helped elevate Vietnamese football in recent years. At the same time, South Korea's entertainment industry is extremely popular in Vietnam, particularly K-pop, with a large and enthusiastic fan base. And there have been suggestions to develop K-pop training models in Vietnam to help nurture local V-pop talent. And of course, Korean brands such as Samsung, LG, and Lotte are very familiar to Vietnamese consumers, not only for their quality products and services, but also for their contributions to employment and economic growth. Overall, the impression of South Korea in Vietnam is very positive, and that sentiment extends to President Lee Jae-myung's visit as well.
All right, Lê Hang Minh, thank you so much for making the time to share your thoughts with us.
Thank you.
US President Donald Trump has extended his ceasefire with Iran at the request of Pakistan. Our An Sung-jin has the latest.
U.S. President Donald Trump has announced an open-ended extension of the temporary ceasefire with Iran. This comes just one day before the original two-week truce was set to expire. In a Truth Social post on Tuesday, Trump stated that the military action will be put on hold as, quote, the government of Iran is seriously fractured, but he said the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports would remain in place until Tehran presents a unified proposal within the leadership. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif thanked Trump after he announced the indefinite extension of the ceasefire with Iran. Sharif expressed an appreciation for Washington's willingness to give diplomatic efforts a chance to advance. The extension comes despite Trump's earlier warnings that hostilities could resume if Tehran failed to engage constructively before the original deadline on the evening of April 22nd. He had previously claimed that he was reluctant to prolong the ceasefire, but ultimately reversed course as the expiration approached. Meanwhile, the White House confirmed to reporters that U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance will no longer be traveling to Pakistan. He had been due to arrive there on Wednesday for planned peace talks. The trip, which would have marked his second visit of Islamabad this month, had been aimed at finalizing a potential agreement with Iranian officials. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
And Iran, for its part, has dismissed Mr. Trump's extension of the ceasefire, claiming that the U.S. has already violated it, which is why Tehran is reportedly not taking part in additional peace talks in Pakistan. Our Lee Soo-jin has more.
Iran has decided not to participate in a second round of ceasefire and peace talks with the United States scheduled for Tuesday in Islamabad. According to Iran's semi-official Tasnim news agency on Tuesday, the decision was conveyed to Washington through mediator Pakistan, dealing a setback to ongoing diplomatic efforts. Tasnim reports that Tehran had initially agreed to negotiations under a U.S.-accepted 10-point framework following Pakistan's mediation and a U.S. request for a ceasefire. However, Iran now accuses Washington of failing to uphold its commitments almost immediately after the agreement, citing that as the primary reason for pulling out. Tasnim added that a hostile U.S. response over reopening the Strait of Hormuz further influenced Tehran's decision. The agency said Iran now sees continued negotiations as futile, with little prospect of reaching a meaningful agreement under current conditions. Iran is also questioning the intent behind U.S. President Donald Trump's latest announcement of a ceasefire extension, warning it could respond militarily if Washington maintains its naval blockade. State media reports Tehran will not recognize the extension and will act based on its national interests. Officials warn that as long as a blockade remains in place, Iran will not reopen the Strait of Hormuz and could use force if necessary to break it. Meanwhile, Iran is taking the dispute to the international stage. The Iranian mission to the United Nations has sent a letter calling on the UN and the Security Council to issue what it described as a firm and unequivocal condemnation of the U.S. decision to attack and seize an Iranian-flagged cargo ship. In a statement posted on X, the mission said the incident constitutes a grave breach of international law, a clear violation of the ceasefire, and an act of aggression bearing what it called the hallmarks of piracy. It warned that such actions endanger international navigation and undermine maritime safety and security. 이수진, Arirang News.
Here in South Korea, the producer price index for the month of March posted its highest monthly hike in almost 4 years. Our economics correspondent Park Jun-han touches upon this tangible fallout of the prolonged unrest in the Middle East.
South Korean households may feel the effects of rising consumer prices in the coming months, as the producer price index for March recorded the largest monthly increase in nearly 4 years. According to data released by the Bank of Korea on Wednesday, the PPI reached 125.24 in March, a 1.6% jump from the previous month. This marks the 7th consecutive monthly increase since September last year, and the largest monthly rise since April 2022, after Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. The primary driver was the sudden volatility in energy markets. As March marked the first full month of the conflict in the Middle East, global oil prices saw a dramatic spike. This led to a 31.9% surge in coal and petroleum products, the highest increase in the sector since the 1997 Asian financial crisis. Chemical products also rose 6.7%, while overall industrial goods prices climbed 3.5%. For average consumers, a rise in the producer price index, especially driven by higher energy costs, means costs are likely to be passed on through higher product prices.
At its core, it's a cost issue. These are the prices producers pay, which feed into intermediate goods and eventually into final consumer products. So when prices rise at the front end, they gradually pass through the supply chain. Ultimately, that shows up as inflation.
An official from the Bank of Korea warned that future movements remain highly uncertain due to ongoing negotiation risks in the Middle East. For now, both consumers and policymakers will be watching closely to see how import-dependent Korea absorbs these rising production costs before they reach the average shopper. Park Jun-han, Arirang News.
In the meantime, though, tensions in the Middle East appear to be having little impact on investor sentiment on the local bourse. The benchmark KOSPI soared past the 6,400 mark for the first time on this Wednesday. Following volatile intraday trading, the index closed at a record 6,417.9, up over 29 points, or more than 0.4%. This historic milestone builds on the previous session's massive 2.7% jump, surpassing the record set prior to the outbreak of the Iran conflict roughly 2 months ago. The head of U.S. forces based here in South Korea is in Washington, D.C., responding to questions about the U.S.'s security posture here in this part of the world, given the Trump administration's military campaign against Iran. Our Ian Jin reports.
U.S. Forces Korea Commander General Xavier Brunson testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee on Tuesday, which came following reports last month that the U.S. military has repositioned part of its THAAD missile defense system in South Korea toward the Middle East to back up America's war efforts against Iran. To this, Brunson said that the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, designed to intercept short, medium, and intermediate-range ballistic missiles using hit-to-kill technology, quote, still remains on the peninsula currently. He added that munitions are being sent to the Middle East, which were ready and waiting to be moved. During the Senate hearing in Washington, Brunson said that the presence of U.S. forces in Korea was strategic, vital to defending American interests in the region. Saying that the U.S. military is adapting to the rapidly evolving strategic dilemmas of regional security, he underscored that his focus remains strictly on capabilities over numbers. Brunson also emphasized the need that political expediency does not outpace the conditions for the transfer of wartime operational control, OPCON, to South Korea from the U.S. Saying that the presence of the U.S. forces is a baseline, he emphasized the conditions needed to be met for the transfer of OPCON as South Korean President Lee Jae-myung's administration continues to push forward in achieving the transition within its 5-year term that ends in 2030. 이은진, Arirang News.
In other news now, there is a new sport in town and it's gaining much interest both from the young and old here. That being said, my colleague Cho Young-eun tried her hand at pickleball.
It looks a bit like tennis and a bit like badminton. At this outdoor court, people are picking up paddles to hit a lightweight plastic ball punctured with holes. They are playing what is known as pickleball. Though still unfamiliar to some, pickleball is a sport that combines elements of tennis, badminton, and table tennis. It can be played both indoors and outdoors on a badminton-sized court with a slightly lower net. This pickleball is lightweight and holding a paddle is simple. Grab the handle naturally, form a V with your thumb and index finger, and use a forehand drive, similar to tennis. Each rally begins with an underhand serve below the waist, and games are typically played to 11 points. Simplicity is its biggest appeal. With short games and easy-to-learn rules, this sport has a low barrier to entry, making it accessible to everyone from children to seniors.
I think the most appealing part is that once you learn the basic rules, anyone can easily jump into a game. I play almost every day of the week.
I had been doing other sports for over 10 years, but I got injured, so I started looking for alternatives. I came across pickleball. I saw that it's very popular in the U.S., and I've been playing it for about 1.5 years now.
And once one person starts playing, they inevitably invite their friends too.
So my wife is Korean, and her friend was playing pickleball here, and then my wife's friend got my wife into pickleball, so now I'm into pickleball. And, you know, we have $200 pickleball paddle later, here I am.
Since its first creation in the USA in 1965, pickleball has surged in popularity in the United States in recent years. In Korea, momentum is building just as quickly following the official launch of the Korea Pickleball Association. The sport's base has expanded within months. New facilities are also emerging, including a recently opened complex at Gwangnam-do Hangang Park in Seoul, featuring 14 dedicated pickleball courts.
At first, many in their 60s and older couldn't even go to the market or ride a bike because their legs hurt. But after playing pickleball for 2 to 3 years, they say they can now walk to shop and visit stores again. Hearing this is incredibly rewarding.
As Korea moves towards becoming a super-age society, sports like pickleball could become a meaningful alternative for leisure and welfare. Cho Young-eun, Arirang News.
And South Korea, well known for its long working hours, is now waking up to the importance of a good night's sleep. In fact, a growing number of workers are choosing to spend their lunch break napping rather than eating. Our Kim Jun-hong was out and about.
It's lunchtime and the streets of Seoul's Gangnam district quickly fill with office workers stepping out to eat. But 25-year-old Park Kyung-jin skips the rush, heading instead to a nearby sleep cafe. Inside a dim, quiet room with a bed, she lies down and soon falls asleep.
I heard about this place from my coworkers and decided to give it a try. I usually don't get enough sleep and feel tired all the time. So instead of lunch and coffee, I'd rather have extra sleep to stay productive in the afternoon.
With earplugs and eye masks, massage chairs, and relaxing music, this calming spot draws workers like Park at lunchtime.
About 90% of our customers are office workers from nearby, and those coming from farther away say they wish there were a place like this near their office.
Trading meals for sleep shows how little Koreans are sleeping.
Koreans sleep an average of 6 hours and 50 minutes per night, about an hour and a half less than the OECD average. That makes Korea one of the lowest ranking countries in the OECD for sleep, with sleep disorders also on the rise.
Longer working hours and intense competition are key drivers of this pattern in a culture that places a premium on productivity and visible results.
Koreans have a strong focus on how things appear to others. But sleep is a highly personal, private activity that isn't visible, so it's often overlooked and pushed aside.
But changing lifestyles and growing interest in inner wellness are beginning to shift perceptions. Such changes are reflected in the rapid growth of the sleep industry. The value of South Korea's sleep market has grown more than tenfold over the past decade, reaching about $3.4 billion last year. The global market is expected to hit around $98 billion this year. The range of products is also diversifying, from mattresses and pillows to health supplements, aromatherapy, and lighting. In particular, South Korea is emerging as a key player in sleep tech, combining advanced ICT with personalized sleep solutions.
For example, lighting systems integrated with smart technology can turn off as users fall asleep, adjust to an optimal color tone, or trigger personalized wake-up sounds.
Changing lifestyles and a growing thirst for a better sleep is giving rise to a new business frontier. Kim Junong, Arirang News.
Today, we've got some rain on the way for the southern regions and Jeju Island. Now, because there's fine yellow dust in the air, some of that rain could dissolve it, so you want to avoid getting caught in it if possible. The rain will taper off by tomorrow morning in the south, but on Jeju, it'll stick around a bit longer, lasting into the daytime hours tomorrow. In terms of rainfall amount, Jeju could see around 10 to 80 millimeters. Meanwhile, for areas missing out on the rain, especially Gangwon-do and northern Gyeongsang-buk-do provinces, dry conditions will prevail, and they remain under a dry weather advisory, so please take extra care. As for temperatures, Seoul will start the day at 10 degrees Celsius, Chuncheon at 7 degrees, Daejeon at 9 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 22 degrees, Daegu at 20 degrees, Busan at 18 degrees. Starting tomorrow, we'll be back to typical late April spring weather, which means mild afternoons, but still a pretty big day-to-night temperature difference. So make sure to dress in layers. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
Those are the headlines at the hour here in South Korea. Coming up now is our daily panel session.
Wow. Oh, this is a bidding. 에너지 들어가 있어요. 우와. 맛봐도 돼요? 와우. 와, 색깔이 조금 노란색이에요. 부드러워요. You see? Beautiful little octopus shape. Yes. Perfect. They're suck.
아리랑 아라리요 아리랑 고개로 넘어간다 힘껏 달려라 멈추지 마 세상 끝까지 가자 아리랑 아리랑 가라리요
President Lee Jae-myung and his Vietnamese counterpart To Lam are sitting down for their summit in Hanoi on this Wednesday. We have more in Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Wednesday, April 22nd. I'm Min Son-hee. Leaders from South Korea and Vietnam are poised to sit down for their second summit in less than a year today, this time in the city of Hanoi. For more on this, I have Stephen Borok from Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia here in the studio. Stephen, welcome back.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
I also have Professor Kim Dong-yeop at the Korean Institute for ASEAN Studies at the Busan University of Foreign Studies. Professor Kim, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Stephen, we shall start here in the studio. So President Lee Jae-myung and his Vietnamese counterpart To Lam are soon slated to sit down for their summit in Hanoi, as I mentioned at the start. What appear to be the issues that look to top their talks based on the media reports leading up to this particular summit?
Well, I would just take a step back. I would just say that some viewers might be surprised to hear that Vietnam is actually South Korea's third largest trading partner. So this is a relationship that has really blossomed in recent years. It's like these are two countries that I think have found that they have a lot of overlap in their interests, and they found that they've been able to get along really well. So I would say that when President Lee and To Lam sit down today, the contours of the meeting, I imagine, will be building on and maintaining those positive areas of growth that they've established in recent years, while also touching upon new ways that they can cooperate to address some of the new and pressing challenges in the global order. So just to talk about like what they have in common, these are both kind of energy vulnerable countries that are got to be concerned about possible disruptions to supply chains in the world right now. These are like non-petroleum producing energy importing countries that have a large manufacturing sector. So I imagine they'll talk about that. And just beyond that, like the bigger themes of relationship between these two sides is that Vietnam is a growing economy. It's one of the faster emerging economies in the world, and it has a growing middle class, and it has a lot of demand for services that South Korean firms can provide. A lot of South Korean companies are quite adept at infrastructure development. I understand that Vietnam is looking to expand its rail network, and there are some South Korean firms who are quite experienced in that era. Nuclear power is another question. I think that the Vietnamese government has made announcements about wanting to expand in that area, and as we know, South Korea is an exporter of nuclear power infrastructure. And so I imagine that, as I said, there are bigger ongoing things that the two sides will look to build on, while also seeing if they can cooperate in kind of patching the holes that seem to be emerging in the global economy nowadays.
And before we delve deeper into the summit today, Professor Kim, could you walk us through the diplomatic and trade relations between South Korea and Vietnam over the past years?
All right. Well, the South Korea and Vietnam has gone from being enemies during the Cold War period to becoming the best of friends. The two countries normalized diplomatic ties in 1992 and have stepped up mutual relationship through several stages, finally reaching the highest level, the comprehensive strategic partnership in 2022. When it comes to economy, Vietnam is now South Korea's third largest trade partner, right after China and the US. In 2025 alone, bilateral trade volume hits nearly $95 billion. Vietnam is also South Korea's primary investment destination. The investment paradigm has shifted from labor-intensive industries to high-tech sectors, including semiconductors, displays, and smartphones. Over 10,000 Korean companies operate in Vietnam, and they contribute to over 25% of Vietnam's total export these days. So it's quite close mutual relationship these days.
Right, I see. Stephen, meanwhile, the first foreign leader to be hosted by the Lee Jae-myung administration upon entering office last June was the Vietnamese leader. Could you remind us about some of the key agreements between these two leaders during their first summit last August?
Well, the headline one was that they pledged to increase their bilateral trade to $150 billion on an annual basis over the next 5 years. And just for context, that number, the level of bilateral trade was $86.7 billion in 2024. So you're talking about not quite doubling it, but almost doubling bilateral trade in a period of 5 years. It's quite an ambitious goal. But as Professor Kim just laid out there, like there already is a fairly robust framework in place for making that happen, because there are thousands of South Korean companies that are already present on the ground in Vietnam. There's a lot of manufacturing taking place there, higher value-added goods, not just light manufacturing, not just labor-intensive things, but a lot of higher tech items that have higher profit margins. The kind of, I guess, a bit of context there might be that some South Korean companies have relocated out of China over the past several years, and Vietnam has been an attractive destination to them. So whether or not they'll be able to realize that goal, it is ambitious, but I think high on the agenda for Lee and To Lam today will be seeing that South Korean companies can continue to have smooth and easy access to the Vietnamese market, and that they have a strong infrastructure in place with enough electricity, enough water, all the things that they need to do business, and a reliable regulatory framework. So I think along the sides of this summit, there will probably be a lot of kind of working level discussions among bureaucrats, like seeking ways that South Korea can, more easily deploy their human resources to the country, having, smooth visa processing, smooth customs processes, all the kind of stuff that doesn't get headlines, but is really integral to an economic relationship like this.
Right, of course. Professor Kim, President Lee Jae-myung, he is the first foreign leader to be hosted by the To Lam administration following its re-election earlier this year. What makes this particular summit between the two leaders significant?
Well, this summit carries profound diplomatic weight as a meeting between the two relatively new leaders. President To Lam's decision to invite the Korean leader as his first foreign guest following his re-election underscores the special relationship that currently defines bilateral ties. Convened immediately after significant domestic development in Vietnam, namely the stabilization of political leadership and the sweeping reorganization of administrative divisions, this summit marks a decisive turning point for both countries in addressing major strategic challenges amid heightened global uncertainties. Politically, this meeting reflects a convergence between Vietnam's flexible diplomacy, often referred to as bamboo diplomacy, and Korea's pragmatic diplomacy, which seeks to secure regional strategic autonomy in the face of intensifying great power competition. Both nations are positioning themselves as mutual contributors to regional peace and stability.
Right, and speaking about the global uncertainties that Professor Kim alluded to, Stephen, for the sake of context, what have been the ripple effects of the unrest in the Middle East for Vietnam?
Similar that we've seen in a lot of countries. I mean, when the price of energy goes up, it has a lot of different potential hurdles. I've read that the price of diesel is something that's really acute in Vietnam because a lot of people get around on motorbikes. And just the prices of food and the prices of everything that anybody needs to live. Just my own analysis is I think that the timing element is kind of interesting for Vietnam here because this is a country that is in the process of building a middle class that's like kind of in the transition from a mostly agrarian society to a more urbanized, a more manufacturing-led society. And so if you have a prolonged disruption at a time like this, it could potentially have like really serious long-term effects. And a big part of the reason I say this is my Nikkei as a colleague, Lian Hong, just recently did some interesting reporting from Vietnam where she reported on the phenomenon of mortgages being kind of new in Vietnam, that in the country up until now, it was kind of customary that like the way that you bought a home was you saved up enough cash, like literal cash, not money in the bank, and then you went and you paid for the house up front. That like taking out a large loan and then paying it back in order to own a home over a course of years or decades was a kind of unconventional thing there. It's something that people are just starting to do now. And so this is just the kind of thing that I imagine the Vietnamese government wants to encourage, things like home ownership and things like investing in more kind of the creation of generational wealth and having less of the population just be dependent on daily wage labor. And so if you're the leadership of this country, you very much want these things to go forward. You want people to have the kind of disposable income and the kind of economic stability that make them possible. So Vietnam to me is, Korea is different. Korea has a quite big and quite robust middle class that it is the current government is trying to protect. And that's a kind of simpler endeavor. There are fuel price caps, there's targeted consumer vouchers from the country. And as long as this doesn't go on too long, South Korea can kind of minimize the damage. But for Vietnam, I would just say the policymakers there are dealing with a different phenomenon where they are trying to maintain momentum and trying to take a sort of developmental leap. So I would say they have a different and more challenging calculus, and they have to be hoping that it's out of their hands. The bigger questions of the war in the Middle East are out of their hands, but they have to be hoping that for the long-term development of the country that this conflict really doesn't last too long.
Right, of course not. Keeping in mind the respective national interests that Stephen just mentioned, Professor Kim, then what are some of the areas that can be further advanced through partnership between South Korea and Vietnam?
Well, the recent conflicts in the Middle East has caused significant disruptions to global supply chains. emphasizing the vulnerability of traditional maritime routes and energy dependencies. Vietnam, as the world's second largest holder of rare earth element, serves as the critical hub for Korea's semiconductor and electronic vehicle battery industries, ensuring a stable flow of materials that bypasses geopolitically sensitive regions. In terms of security, both nations act as stabilizers by enhancing maritime security cooperation and safeguarding sea lines of communication. Furthermore, Vietnam serves as a unique diplomatic mediator for the Korean Peninsula. By sharing the institutional framework of the Doi Moi reforms, Vietnam provides a viable socio-economic roadmap for North Korea's potential transition and integration into the global economy. Well, the foundation of this partnership remains people-centered. As of late 2025, the number of Korea-Vietnam multicultural families has exceeded 100,000, creating a substantial demographic breach. Developing educational and legal support systems for these families and their children is essential to transform this demographic shift into a strategic asset for a genuine partnership between the two countries.
Right, for sure. And that particular issue was also mentioned by President Lee Jae-myung during his luncheon with the Korean community in Hanoi on this Wednesday. Stephen, on the geopolitical front, what perhaps are the common challenges that the two countries, South Korea and Vietnam, can seek to address together?
Well, I also thought of the Vietnam's role on the Korean Peninsula, as Professor Kim just laid out. I mean, I would also mention that To Lam visited North Korea in October of last year. He's one of relatively few world leaders that has had that kind of access to the North. So I have to imagine that maybe at a dinner tonight or, in some other kind of quiet, away from the spotlight moment, President Lee might bring that up and he might say, how did that go? What did you learn on that trip? And is there a possibility that, as it kind of has in the past, like let's not forget in 2019, Vietnam was the site of the summit between US President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Could Vietnam act as a kind of dialogue channel or a potential venue for the exchanging of information, the exchanging of views between North and South? If President Lee is planning a more decisive olive branch dialogue push to North Korea before the end of his term, I think he would probably be wise to check with Vietnam just about their experiences and what they're hearing, and if it's possible that they maybe pass along a message or something to that effect. And also just Vietnam is often touted as a potential that North Korea has a chance at a kind of potential path that similar to what Vietnam has taken, like going from being a quite restrictive communist state to being a pretty open economy, a flourishing trade-oriented economy, but that has retained a lot of the characteristics of its political system. It's still not, a liberal democracy by any means. It's still not a country where you can speak freely or criticize the leaders as much as some people might like to. But its living standards and its health indicators and all those things have improved markedly. So it's something to watch, and it's something that I think the people in the Lee administration who are responsible for North Korean policy, it's an area that they would be looking to more, I think.
Right, and speaking about the Lee Jae-myung administration, Professor Kim, this particular visit to Vietnam follows a similar visit to India earlier this week. How do you assess the administration's diplomatic efforts thus far?
Well, Lee Jae-myung administration's foreign policy is defined by pragmatic autonomous diplomacy, which emphasize national interest over ideological considerations. In the face of intensifying U.S.-China rivalry, the government seeks to secure a strategic space that allows South Korea to diversify its diplomatic options without taking side. The implementation of this strategy involves cooperation with the Global South, with a particular focus on ASEAN and India to cultivate a strategic third space. This approach facilitates risk mitigation and ensures Paris flexibility during period of global uncertainty. However, I think notable constraints rise in the administration's heavy reliance on economic-centric engagement during high-level summits. While economic cooperation is essential, it is very important, but it does not automatically translate into socio-political trust. Sustainable partnership requires shared values and deeper mutual trust and understanding, which in turn makes economic cooperation more resilient. South Korea must transcend its transactional framework and emerge as a sincere, reliable partner across both economic and geopolitical dimensions. That's it.
Right. We have about a minute left. Stephen, speaking as a foreign journalist based here in South Korea, how would you assess the administration's diplomatic efforts thus far?
Well, I'm just going to remind myself and the audience that I'm an objective reporter who keeps his opinions to himself. So I would just refer to what we know of the assessments of the South Korean public, and I would just say that Lee Jae-myung's approval ratings are quite high. They're in the high 60%, I think, and the Lee administration will face its first electoral test on June 3rd in the form of local elections. And if you look at poll data for those, the DP is leading in pretty much every major riding. They're even leading in the city of Daegu, which is known as South Korea's most conservative city. And I wouldn't say that foreign policy is the only reason, or maybe even not even the main reason for that. But for Lee to have oriented his foreign policy in a way where, according to the national interests, like he says, pragmatically, like he says, that's a very persuasive and a very easy to sell message to the South Korean public, I think. For him to say that he is going to orient South Korea's external relations in a way that benefits the country, the way that benefits regular South Koreans in the forms of trade and economic development, and not sticking to any kind of ideological framework. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that it's going over quite well with the public here.
Right, indeed. Well, we'll see that pragmatic diplomacy in action later today in Hanoi, as well as, of course, Vietnam's bamboo diplomacy, as Professor Kim mentioned earlier. All right, Stephen, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Professor Kim, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you.
Right, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. We return same time tomorrow with more panel discussion on the summit in Hanoi. Do join us then. Thank you for now.
My name is Bernadette Therese Fernandez. I'm the Philippine Ambassador to the Republic of Korea. I take this opportunity to convey my congratulations